And today's topic is gluten sensitivity. Is it real or is it just a fad? And if it is real, could it be some other components besides the gluten that's causing the symptoms? Stay tuned as we answer those questions and more. And what's up everybody, CW here again from Consider It Health, where I consider some of the biggest health topics today. And today's topic is a big one, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or NCGS, or just more commonly known as gluten sensitivity. To start off, let's begin with definitions. So what exactly is non-celiac gluten sensitivity? Well, typically it is a diagnosis of exclusion, which tells us more of what it is not than what it is. So what is it not? Okay, well, number one, it is not celiac disease. Celiac disease is an autoimmune condition which affects about 1% of the American population, and it is characterized by autoantibodies, which are antibodies that you develop against your own body's tissues, and in this case, against your small bowel, and these are called transglutaminase antibodies. So, it is not celiac disease, and it is also not the second thing, which is wheat allergy. Wheat allergy is also an immune condition that is characterized by IgE antibodies, and so your body has a reaction to the wheat proteins. So where does that leave non-celiac gluten sensitivity? Well, it's a little bit murky, which is why we're having this conversation today. So let me get into that a little bit more. So the first thing often brought up, especially against just gluten-free diets, is, isn't this all just a fad? Well, granted, there are a lot of people that follow low gluten or no gluten diets because they believe it to be healthy for them, even though they have no symptoms or things that they would suspect would be wrong. And that's estimated up to be about 30% of the population have tried either a low or no gluten diet. Now, for those that actually have the symptoms, it could actually be a real serious thing. They experience symptoms that are very similar to what those with celiac disease can often experience when they have gluten. So this includes intestinal symptoms like bloating, gas, abdominal pain, and it can even include extraintestinal symptoms, meaning symptoms outside the digestive tract. And this includes brain fog, fatigue, moodiness, depression, anxiety. So it is a real thing, a real big issue for those that experience this. But that raises the question, could it be some other component besides the gluten? And we're going to address that next. So some people, including practitioners and researchers, will actually say gluten may actually not be the real issue, but maybe FODMAPs is what is causing it. Now, what are FODMAPs? They are fermentable oligosaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. I know that's a mouthful, but what they are fermentable sugars that can cause symptoms in many people. Now, these are sugars and not protein, of which gluten is one of them. Now, this is often brought up because of research that Bisekursky and colleagues did. They did a study in 2011 which showed that, yes, indeed, there are people that have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. But then they did a follow-up study 2 years later where they put people on a low FODMAP diet first, and then the people's symptoms got way better. Now, they reintroduced gluten and they felt worse. However, despite this, they concluded that the FODMAPs was actually the principal issue with a lot of these patients. So it led to a lot of people questioning whether gluten is actually the bigger issue or maybe FODMAPs. There's also another study by Skoji and colleagues where they put people either on gluten, fructan, which is a type of FODMAP, or a placebo. And by the end of the study, what they found was that people actually had the worst reactions, not to the gluten, but to the fructan. And so again, this reinforced the fact that it may actually be the FODMAPs and not the gluten. So my thoughts on this is, number one, both of these studies focused on patients with irritable bowel syndrome. Now, IBS is a huge also catch-all, kind of like non-celiac gluten sensitivity, so it's also a little murky itself. But I think it would be interesting to have studies on people that have reported gluten sensitivity but without IBS. I wonder if that would change things. But number two, and probably more importantly, is NCGS, remember, is an umbrella term. It catches a lot of different people with similar symptoms supposedly caused by gluten. Now, undoubtedly, it's going to catch people that are sensitive to FODMAPs. So under this umbrella, there's going to be a subset of people that are actually, if they eliminate the FODMAPs, their symptoms will get a lot better. But there will still be a lot of people in that umbrella that don't get better, and it may not be the FODMAPs at all. And so another component that people will say, okay, this might be the reason that people have symptoms with NCGS is not the gluten, but it's actually the lectins. So lectins, you guys may have heard of lectins, especially because of books like The Plant Paradox by Dr. Gundry. And so basically lectins are a different type of protein, not gluten, but a different type of protein found in wheat. And not just in wheat, but in other plant-based foods, including in tomatoes and nuts and things like that. And so some people may actually feel that when they eliminate lectins, they feel so much better. And so the thought is, could this be one of the biggest reasons why people that have non-celiac gluten sensitivity feel better when they eliminate gluten? Because it's not because of the gluten, it's actually because of the lectins. Now, my thought on that is very similar to my thoughts on FODMAPs. Yes, again, NCGS, gluten sensitivity, under this umbrella, undoubtedly there will be certain people, maybe they really aren't sensitive to the gluten at all, and maybe it is sensitivity to the lectins, and maybe again to the FODMAPs. And one thing we must not forget is you could be sensitive to multiple things. It may not just be the FODMAPs, but it could also be the FODMAPs and the lectins, or the lectins and the gluten, or all three or more. So it is not mutually exclusive. I think we need to have that in mind. And then one thing I just want to bring up about testing. So to discuss testing, I made this diagram that I think will be really helpful to help piece everything that we've talked about today together and to answer the question about non-celiac gluten sensitivity. All right, so I made this diagram that I hope will be helpful in understanding some of the testing. So under wheat, we know that there are proteins and there are carbs. And under carbs, the big one that can cause symptoms is FODMAPs. FODMAPs, again, are those fermentable sugars that we talked about, and fructans is the one I mentioned earlier. That is the principal FODMAP in wheat. Now, under wheat, of course, there are proteins as well, two of them being gluten and lectins. There are some others, but these are the main two that we discussed. Now, under lectins, the main one is wheat germ agglutinin. Now, if we go to gluten, which is where we focused a lot of our topic on today, you'll see that it's actually made of two subproteins, gliadin and glutenin. Now, what's often checked in even part of a comprehensive celiac panel is the alpha gliadin. That's why I made it red here. But what you notice here is that actually 4 different types of gliadin, so these are often missed. And so someone is reacting to beta gliadin or gamma gliadin or omega gliadin, or possibly even to the glutenin, which is less common, but it does happen. That person may be falsely told that they have no problem with gluten and they should just be able to eat whatever gluten they want, even though they truly have a reaction. So you can see how this would underdiagnose a lot of people that truly have non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There are other components as well, like opioid peptides, which I'm not going to mention too much of, that people react to as well. And so hopefully this diagram does help you with a bigger picture of seeing the different components that can cause people to react. So what do we do with all this? Well, I think it's safe to say that there is indeed a part of the population that really has non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but oftentimes it's just underdiagnosed because of the lack of testing of different components of gluten. Now, there are other people that actually just strictly react to the FODMAPs or the lectins, and those that think they actually have non-celiac gluten sensitivity don't really have that because the term would not be accurate. It's not the gluten they're reacting to. So maybe a better term for those patients would actually be non-celiac wheat sensitivity, and that has been proposed in the literature. So from a practical standpoint, for a lot of people that are sensitive to some component of wheat, to them it may not actually matter whether it's the gluten or the FODMAP or the lectin. They just know they feel better without eating it. So to them it probably doesn't matter because a lot of the same foods that have gluten have FODMAPs and lectins, so it's hard to eliminate one without eliminating the other. But from a scientific standpoint, it is important to have good definitions, so I think that does really matter. So there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you found something interesting and you enjoyed the episode. Was there anything in my video today that was surprising? Are there more subtopics that I covered today that you would like to hear more about? If so, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you.